Hello and welcome back to another political education video. This little session that we have here just talking about politics, get our brains turning about the world, the conditions that we exist in, and how they all interrelate with each other. The basis of our analysis, of course, in dialectical materialism, just to help us understand how material phenomena occur in the material condition by which we exist in. We do not exist in such an ideal world, everything and all phenomena constricted and restrained by the forces of the material condition of which we exist, and studying those conditions, those phenomena, help us understand us as well. So, political education, discussion time. What is it? What is it about? What are we talking about today? I am Jaden, organizing out of the Bay Area, California. Today is the negation of the negation. Last week was the another law of dialectics. It could be the first thing. You know, it's out of order every time you look it up. Every different source has a different order to these. But another law, quantitative gradual change into qualitative revolutionary change. The quick example of that is putting a pot of water on a stove, cranking the heat up. You'll notice at one point, if you look away, that water that's not boiling all of a sudden boils. That's that thrown qualitative change. In the inconspicuous production, that gradual change, that rise in temperature, you don't see that adage of temperature, but you see that boiling water. That's that quantity and quality. The negation of the negation is a step further. So you'll see the bullet points right under that topic: establishing limits, breaking the limits. And so basically the whole idea of the negation is that the new supersedes the old. So there is a change that occurs that denotes that is not that anymore, or that has changed into that, this and that. We will get into deeper examples, discussions about it. And then the following point, striking solidarity itself can be negated. And we'll talk about what it means to negate something, basically the new superseding the old, the phasing out of itself, and how change occurs in the material condition. Let's get right into the law, of which then we can apply the law to everything else. Very exciting. So, the negation of the negation. This stems from dialectics, and it is one of the law of dialectics, and it is how we understand movement and motion in the material condition. The negation of the negation is an advanced application of dialectics, and it goes something like this. And we will talk about capitalism as the example of which Karl Marx has denoted a particular negation to the system, at which that negation will be undone by itself. Here's how it works. Take capitalism. And the whole premise entire of capitalism is the fact that capitalism functions on the workings and the handlings and the presence of private property. And to understand private property, you have to understand where it comes from. Feudal times, and the monarchs, kings and queens, lords and all that, had individual property. Every single piece of property in that, well, for the majority part, was owned by the person laboring on it, or owned by the divine person. So the peasant owned all of the tools, maybe the scissor, the hoe, the till, all of the not so machinery, but the handicrafts were owned by the person laboring with it. Under capitalism, this is not the case. It is considered private property. Now, the person in the production, in the company, does not own the cash register that they use, and the till and the money that comes out of it. They do not own the brooms at which used to sweep the floors, the wage laborer, the worker in capitalism. So, in feudal times, you had individual property where people both pretty much owned everything that they had. They pretty much made everything by hand. So, therefore, he hath mixed his labor with, it becomes his individual property. Private property now is that capital, materialized labor, at which recognized to a particular ownership, of which that ownership can be utilized to extract surplus value, to extract a particular profit. And it goes like this. The CEO of chair making company owns all of the wood, the saws, the glue, the lacquer, all of these things to make the chair. And all the laborer does, the wage laborer, comes in with their labor, their ability to make the chair, of which they do not own any of the resources besides their labor. That is all that the laborer owns, or as we call them, the proletariat. All that the proletariat owns is their ability to make things with their labor. We call that the sale of labor in capitalism. So, under this premise of private property, the handlings of which stuff can be owned but then labored by another to procure and extract that surplus value, this sets the first negation. This sets the negation of capitalism. It can only operate as such. Should any other relation of production be entered, like the workers owning the means of production, now no longer privatized, it is no longer a capitalism. Capitalism is defined by this present and use and handling of private property. This is what Karl Marx denotes as its first negation. It is negated its own growth by having this relation of production. You cannot make a capitalism if any other relation of production were present. You couldn't have a capitalism if all of the workers in the workplace own the means of production. Only one private owner or a group of private owners own that means of production to which they extract surplus value out of that production, or in this case, the chair making company. You have 1,000 people making chairs in an assembly line, but the workers do not reap what they all sow. There is a portion extracted, or a majority of the portion extracted, that is privatized. That does not go to the worker. That is what makes capitalism. So, the negation of capitalism is the fact that private property is present, and the negation of feudalism is the fact that individual property sets the basis of production. And so therefore you can also talk about the negation of socialism would be the public property would be that state-owned publicized property, to which then would then evolve into a communism. No ownership of property would then be considered common property. But that's way far in the future. We're talking about capitalism here now. So the second negation to this negation is that growth, and it usually is the human person, the masses, the oppressed classes of society, which outgrow and break the limits of this mode of production. So you establish the limits first, your first negation. The fact that private property exists, the fact that private property does handle in which ways to allow the individual to maneuver in society and production, to labor themselves, to own products or capital, to then makes the enterprise function in the extraction of profits. That is your capitalism. Its second negation, the breaking of the limits, the masses understanding and realizing or feeling the burn of this exploitation. Hey, wait a minute. There's a lot of us that are not being owed what we need. And so therefore there is a ultimatum. You die in the system or you revolutionize against the system. And this is what this lovely space here now at GSUS is, and other the communist parties and whatnot. It is that revolutionizing the system, is the understanding that the boss man, not your direct supervisor, but the boss man CEO person, yeah, that dude, that guy, exploitive. That guy does not care about the individual laborer inside of the mode of production. All they care about is the profit. It itself, that also a negation of capitalism. If you make your mode of production entirely reliant on the profit motive, that itself negates growth to a particular point, at which that point, second law of dialectics, that quantitative development and buildup causes a revolutionary change. You gotta see all these laws and dialectics all mold and mash in together to make the understanding and clear critique of the material condition. It's lovely. It's great. So now we get to the third bullet point, the new superseding the old, which is basically the summary of how the negation of the negation works. The first negation of capitalism sets private property as the functionings of the mode of production, and the second negation is the mere fact of the forces inside of production outgrowing the limitations of what private property can offer to a society. That is the second negation. The negation of capitalism is the fact that private property constrains the forces of production, at which at one point will revolutionize and break those limits or break those chains. So when you talk about breaking chains, establishing limits, and breaking those limits, all of that comes on contingent of what is established and what is present. So whatever is present does make the first negation, whatever is established. So when we talk about feudalism, feudalism is negated by its individual property. There is so restrictive, limited handling of how people can maneuver and labor. Capitalism emerged out and addressed the contradictions of feudalism to create private property. Now no longer the king owns everything, or now no longer a peasant has to make stuff for him to own. Someone else can make the stuff for me to own. That's how a capitalism works. Someone else can make these earbuds that I'm wearing now for that me to own. in feudal times, majority of the time, it was the laborer themselves who makes the things for themselves. And of course, you had a collective of people making wagons, but very small, petty forms of production, which were primarily and primitively socialized. It was very restrictive, very limited, and of which the bourgeois of that era recognized the contradictions inside of feudalism to make a capitalism, of which then the socialists of the bourgeois era, the capitalist system, recognized the contradictions of this mode of production to create a socialism. It's a cyclical cycle. We do this to ourselves all the damn time. But that is the nature in life. That is the second, or the second bullet point under the second bullet point itself, the phasing out of self, the phasing out self. So going into the second bullet point, and we'll tie in negation back into it. The Black Panther Party, GSUS itself, and other organizations of the like revolutionary seek to phase themselves out. It is not the point and purpose for the strike to be permanent. For the strike to be permanent, that means capitalism will be permanent, because that's what we're striking against. The point of the strike, the GSUS strike, is to dismantle capitalism, of which then itself will dismantle the need for a strike. That's kind of how it works. We don't want the strike to be here forever. We don't want capitalism to be here forever. So we must understand that through this negation of capitalism, we must address how to overcome, usually through the natural quantitative additions to our contributions to the forces, this is the structures and establishments, our mutual aid networks, these political education times and discussions, to raise the revolutionary consciousness, to raise the chances of revolution, to make that negation. All of this compounds onto one another. Everything's interconnected. But the phasing out of itself, I said, the Black Panther parties themselves say that the party, the Black Panthers, would not exist in a system that wasn't exploitive, right? The need for the Black Panthers, the need for any sort of party, is to address the contradictions in the mode of production or in the mode of society, which then establishes its own negation. The negation of the Black Panther Party is the fact that capitalism needs to not exist anymore. So, and then when the capitalism doesn't exist anymore, so does the Black Panther Party or the GSUS or any other sort of organization that is antithetical to capitalism. That's kind of how that works. You don't want anything to be forever. One, first and foremost, nothing can be forever. And two, should you want anything forever, that's a contradiction to existence. Capitalism does this to itself unknowingly. Capitalism wants there to be this relation forever. Monarchs, kings, and queens and feudal lords wanted this forever, and it wasn't. So I don't know where the bourgeois got the big old idea of, yeah, no, this is forever. We're gonna do this for like forever. Like this is humanity at this point. We've reached pinnacle and peak of development and technological advances. Sorry to say, buddy, that's not how the material condition works. If you look in history, and that's where dialectical materialism, the other half of dialectical materialism is historical materialism, historicism. So you understand how things develop. Feudalism wasn't forever. Agrarian cultures and productions before weren't forever. Slave societies weren't forever. Socialism will not be forever. Yes, it is so at one point, relative to the conditions at which they existed in, the bourgeois were considered a revolutionary force, but revolutionary relative to the feudal times, right? Which was insanely, to our, position, insanely conservative, where the bourgeois themselves were only less conservative to that point. But they did not have this understanding of dialectical materialism to understand the contradictions of which they were producing private property, to which then their inner workings of would restrict and limit itself. There was no, in organizational theory, is a very important thing to have in any organization or party, self-crit. Self-criticism prevents this type of building upon itself so massively where it just cannot hold itself and then eventually just kills itself. The bourgeois have, birthed out of the private property handlings of a group of people, a revolutionary group of people that will overthrow its system, the proletariat. So in socialism, this will not be a thing as much as we will be aware and conscious of the fact of how we organize our production versus man's greed to want to, or not inherently, man's ability to rearrange the material condition of which helps the particular, not the general. I'll notice when billionaires and CEOs say, "Oh, I did this all myself. That was all me. I did that. I built this business from the ground up. Don't mind my all other 5,000 employees that I employ at minimum wage. That was all me." Scientific system does grow with us. It addresses the contradictions directly as they emerge out of the change at which we rearrange through the material condition to fulfill our current needs. Our current needs set the contradictions for future needs, of which scientific socialism addresses without having this panic. And it's cyclical. In the 1800s, what Engels and Marx had noted about capitalism is that every 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there was a little recession. There was a transfer of wealth from the working class to the bourgeois. And this was cyclical. It wasn't, you wouldn't say it was intentional at the time, but historically it's intentional the way that this system works. It is cyclical, just like any other, and it is exploitive. So it is cyclically exploitive. It will keep doing these recessions until it can no longer no more, either in two outcomes: the revolution succeeds or we burn ourselves to the ground. But if you do understand how socialism develops, the material condition growing, and the law of the negation of understanding how that applies to capitalism, you will have full revolutionary optimism and confidence to know that we will not reach the latter point of our self-destruction. We will reach that social development and the mode of production that allows for humans to, self-determine, all that good stuff. But that is how change occurs, that last bullet point. It is that knowing of how the material condition functions. Right? The feudalism wasn't forever. The slave societies weren't forever. Our time as primitive, spear chucking people, our homies in the way back when, weren't forever. We are now not forever. Things change. And that is a natural form of existence. Things change. And when we will appreciate that fact, not like capitalism and the privatized mode of productions, feudalism and slavery and stuff, to appropriate the fact that things aren't forever. Scientific socialism, of course, appreciates the fact that things aren't forever. And that's a good thing. Right? That's something we should embrace, that things aren't forever. If things were forever, things would be stagnant, conservative. There would be existing conditions from one time into another that is contradictory to the existence in that later time. There would be a constant addressing of the contradiction, but no one would know how to correctly address them, or they would have a difficult time addressing them, right? If you had like old structure, like the American Constitution itself is contradictory to modern society, especially when you understand the language and the conditions at which it was written in. Like here's an easy one right here. All men are created equal. First off, men, the penis holders, and all, right? Karl Marx's biggest critique about that statement is that no one is created equal. We are all physically, materially different, right? No one is born the same. It's a good thing. We embrace this. We like how this occurs in the material condition. We don't want everyone to be the same. There would be no differences. There would be no spice to life. There would be no experience. There would be no living. There would be no love. Everything would just be the same. That's boring. You don't want to be all equal. See that white man, when he said that back then, he was only thinking about himself. He was only thinking about himself and his slaves. I don't make the rules. I'm just observing them and then telling you about it. But that's how it works, though. We appreciate and understand the material condition is what sets us apart from privatized reactionary modes of society and production, of which this development helps the individual person in society, not hinders them and blocks their growth, right? The one business owner who got lucky or, who made their way to millions was like, if I can do it, so can the end. But if everyone else can do it, everyone would be rich. But notice how not everyone is rich. It is a systematic issue which allows and disenfranchises people to attain that kind of growth, right? So I'm not saying everyone needs to be petit bourgeois or bourgeois business owners. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it is within our capabilities and capacities to be able to do that. And then I was trying to tie it back into Mayday, because it is tomorrow. Woo, Mayday, labor itself, and labor and Mayday, and this recognition of worker power, very important, because it is not the business owner bourgeois who makes stuff happen. It is the masses collective. It is the quantitative body of the masses which creates revolutionary change for society. It is the people that do this stuff. You think it's just one guy or a bunch of dudes in a boardroom be like, yeah, we're going to draft a plan, and then that's how stuff changes. Who makes that plan materialize? Who does all of the stuffs to make the things happen? Not the shareholders, not the CEOs and board members and people who type the little plans out, print it out on a doc or show it on a slideshow, be like, yes, this is how change is made in my nice little comfort AC line boardroom. Yeah, no, it's the workers on the foot, on ground, face to face with the masses and the people to make that connection, to make that actualization of the plan that was thought up by just a relative few, right? It is the people who make that change. The people make that. But of course, everyone knows that. It's just we don't know how we do it, right? There are sectors and sections of the entire economy alienated from another section and sector of the economy. And this alienation, also known as the division of labor, the division of labor allows for this handling of the pieces and pawns of production of the proletariat pitting against one another. An easy example of this, white collar versus blue collar. Working class all the same, but you have one who is more oppressed than another, and you have one who is bordering that class traitorism, where it's that white collar transitioning into bourgeois, oppressing the working class. And once aligning on that side, you can almost bring them back, just like the petite bourgeois, your small business owner. There are ways, but they exist in like this phase where it's like you're not entirely oppressive bourgeois, but you're not entirely working class revolutionary standard. So there exists this space for your petite bourgeois, your white collar, the individuals who own capital, your peasants, your handicraftsmen, your manufacturers who own the means of production to a certain point, like some farmers. Farmers exist kind of in that peasant class where they own land that is theirs, but the land that they own is utilized for a profit. That's petite bourgeoisness. That's you're a peasant. If you don't make a profit off of the stuff, you just use it for your living and subsistence. That's very peasantry. But your petite bourgeois is when you have a means of production, like a sewing machine or like an industrial, I don't know, cooker or something to make stuff. You make a profit off it. Petite bourgeois. Now we're getting a little off topic. But these the workers all together, and ultimately society is divided into two classes, right, with each special detachment aligning to one of these two classes: the owning class, ruling class, or the working class, the oppressed class, right? So it is all these tiny little detachments which align with one or the other. It's either you are the oppressor or you're not, or you're the one getting oppressed. That's how these two classes align. It's either you have capital and then you have a means of living of subsistence exploited by your working class, or you are the working class getting exploited. That is kind of how at least the class dynamics of this society function and works. In feudal times, it was a little bit different. Now you had divine king right and rule to a very much tinier minority of the society, controlling and owning the means of production, oppressing the relatively much larger class of peasants, serfs, the individual people, the unhoused. Even you had unhoused back then, but then it was just considered shacks. Anyways, yes, middle class. So the myth of the middle class is to further divide society, and especially the proletariat, especially the working classes. So you have these little classes, so lower middle, upper class, rich, filthy gang, rich class, whatever. All of those classes are class distractions themselves. So they are detachments. I wouldn't use like the terms. Yeah, it is like trying to throw you off by saying middle class, but I wouldn't call it those specific terms, lower, middle, upper. Those are class distractions, but they themselves are class detachments of the working class. It's just that you put them in social strata now. Lower class, ooh, that's low. Middle class, oh, that's not. Upper class, absolute cinema. That's where you want to be. And in this society, you want to be a billionaire. You want to do and have all of these material things, own the means of production, privatized for your own personal interest. Because if you don't, you suffer. That's the crux of the capitalist system. It's that there exists suffering and people know it and egg it on. People egg on suffering. Like, hey, if you don't get that job, you're gonna suffer. If you don't do this for your retirement, you're gonna suffer. You're gonna suffer here on earth, and then you mix in some Christian evangelicalism, and then you're gonna suffer in the afterlife. How does that sound? Now we're going to fearmonger you into participating in the mode of production, although exploitive on all ends of this mode of production. You see, kind of see how that works. There's exploitation existing all within the system. You just have to understand how to look at it. But really, it's just observing the relations of production. Who labors? versus who attains the profit. If the labor is not attaining all the profit of which all of that labor made the material and the object, the product in the economy, then it's an exploitive system, right? So let's say I went ahead and made the chair and it's worth $100. We'll put it on the market for $100. That the resources costed $20. My labor was $80, right? $100 for that chair, very clean. Someone buys it for $100. Cool, great. The labor is like, I want my money. I want my dues in production. And the capitalist bourgeois will look at you and be like, no, that was my resources. This is my company name. This I sold it. I looked the face in the customer and said, here's your transaction, here's your chair. I'm gonna take my cut. And I think it's only fair that I take $50. Whoa, that's a lot. But who's gonna stop them when, of course, you have to consider that the bourgeois exists within the protection of the state. Boo, scary, the state, an apparatus of any class which oppresses another class. Here's how it works. The bourgeois state, of which you exist in now, your reactionary state, your bipartisan, the two which divides America, which, no longer class solidarity can exist because you have this division of politics, your falsification of the two-party system. You have this establishment, reactionary and bourgeois, which oppresses its other class. Society is made up in two classes. When a single class has ownership and control and the maneuvering of the state, they will, in having that state, oppress the other class. So this is how the dictatorship of the proletariat works. So right now we live under the dictatorship of the bourgeois, of the ruling class, of the capital owning. That is who is in state right now. And you'll have your different detachments, your petit bourgeois, your liberal of the kind, the individual who is aligning with capitalism, even though they like social reform and justice, boo-ha. You have this dichotomy, bourgeois and proletariat. Dictatorship of the proletariat flips this dynamic on its head. Now no longer do privatized owners own the state, of which use that state to oppress the proletariat, the socialized class in a sense, to which then dictatorship of the proletariat, whoosh, now it is the dictatorship, now it's the proletariat who oppresses the now minority of the bourgeois class. Now, ideologically as well, we will have a great rift. Not a lot of people are jiving on the vibe of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Me personally, I think it's a great thing. I think this addressing of the contradiction of capitalism, because right now in capitalism, you are free to not have a house. You are free to starve on the streets. You are free to not have an education. That's all you. That's what capitalism and the greater part of the ideology, liberalism, allows for individuals to have. This freedom to do anything. And this unguided freedom as well. You are free to do a lot in this capitalist system. You are free to be an asshole. You are free to not care about your neighbor. You are free to not care about the environment. You are free to do a lot of things. And of course, you have your laws, which are a reaction of what people have done, to which then people say, hey, don't do that. A law is made. Now you can't do that, but you still can. You just end up in jail, arrested. But then, of course, that invites the prison industrial complex. Back to the discussion topic at hand. You are free to do a lot of things in capitalism and liberalism as well. This whole ideology, the society, of which the dictatorship of the proletariat says, no, like you are not now free to have no food or water. You are forced in this sense to have subsistence for your living, for yourself. You are now forced to be in a house. And of course, Karl Marx and the broader Eastern Bloc philosophers emerging from it, from the late 1800s, 1900s, of course, USSR and all that, says and states socialism can be enacted. All of the capital is materialized already. All of the, right now in the modern era, the software, the logistics, all of the framework, the plant, the labor, the body of the mode of production. It's there. It exists already. Socialism is capable within this framework. There just needs to be this shift. There just needs to be this ability to do, of which the masses are incapable of. For that, Malcolm X, lack of organization. We're not outnumbered, out-organized. It is getting to that organizational point at which then socialism can be a thing, because capital we already have the freight and the shipping to make maneuvers and move products and goods across the seas. We have planes and aviation technology already to make those exchanges and trades and make them more efficient under social society. We have buildings, we have farms, we have technology, we have all of these things already materialized. It's just privatized. And that is the basis of capitalism, to privatize stuff, private property, to say who and what can do with your property at any given moment. Because what is stopping any billionaire from letting some rando drive their jet? It's because they said they don't want that rando, flying their jet. That's private property. It's saying that I own this, it's mine, and I can do whatever I want with it. That's your private property. Socialism turns that into a state-owned public property, of which then it'll phase itself out to then become private or common property. Sorry. But private property is the basis of capitalism. It's that saying I can do what I want with this because it's mine. I own it. It's this exchange. I got this product from XYZ long ago. It's mine now. I can do whatever I want with that property. That's how capitalism works. And I can do whatever I want with that property. Tell you to, because if it can extract value out of that property, you can give some of that value to the worker in order for them to gain subsistence, gain their material conditions sustained, gain their food, water, housing, or shelter in the free market. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between slavery and not serfdom, the proletariat. So when you're talking about slavery, serfdom, proletariat, these different oppressed classes in their struggle. So in the enslaved times, it was the slave owner and the slave some thousands years ago. And of course, recently in America, hundreds of years ago, the slave was property. They were owned. They are not a free individual. So, and it is not to say that the slave had better conditions, but they were the owners were forced to take care of them in order for them to reproduce themselves in their slave mode of production. So the owner had to provide housing, provide little food, provide little water, enough to keep them alive in order for the slaves to do the slave work. Now you transition into feudalism, the mode of production after slavery. You had this relationship of production where now the king did not directly own the serf, but the king owned the land under that serf, of which the serf tilled, got about their products, their wheat and whatnot, their whatever vegetables they grew, and then gave some of that, or whatever partition to the king, to the lords of the land, landlords, that's where that term comes from, to then they gain their subsistence from that. Now it's like 15 shekels. I'm going to need an X amount of potatoes. Now you can use those shekels to, I don't know, buy new turnip or new turnip, a shirt, pants, wherever it may be, new tools, or you could just make it yourself. Because it was at this point in a feudal society where you could just chop down a tree, build a house, and you can make stuff. That was allowable. Now, in the transition from capitalism or from feudalism to capitalism, the serf, the peasant, still remained. Slaves still remain, because that is how production and evolution works, emerging. You'll still have little partitions of the previous modes of production in the new one. Notice how in capitalism you still have kings and queens, we just call them CEOs and shareholder members, and give value to the shareholders. Those people, they still exist. The king of courts, they still exist in different forms. Now you have a new emerging class, because serfs did not exist in slavery, proletariat did not exist in slavery because of the relations of production. That evolution of production in capitalism emerged out a proletariat at which completely at the whims of the bourgeois or the oppressing class. Because as a serf, you had built your own house and you can make another house, right? You owned, I said the king owned all the land. You still had land. You still had ownership of the area to the small territory you had as a peasant, as a serf. So you still own stuff. And so this relation of production makes that mode of production. So in the capitalism times right now, the proletariat only has their labor to sell, but they're free people. And that's the differences between a slave and a proletariat in its definition. The proletariat is a free person. They are free to do whatever they want. The business owner, your bourgeois, the owner of production, no longer has to take care of the proletariat. All they have to do is provide them a subsistent wage, of which the forces of the economy determine that wage. Kinda, sorta, not really. The minimum wage of any market is going to be established by the state of which in this act would be in a socialist. A minimum wage is a socialist value. I don't know if you knew that. Minimum wage is not a capitalist value. The capitalism will never have a minimum wage. Should you want to do an actual free market capitalism, which your laissez-faire capitalists are dwindling day by day. Now they're all becoming corporate capitalists, those piggies, those absolute fucking leeches of society. They're all becoming landlords. But that is the differences between your slave and your proletariat and your serf. Now the proletariat no longer gains subsistence from their employer. They're not required. The employer is not required to. All the employer is required to is just give them a paycheck, and that paycheck is what sustains the individual. So who's to say that paycheck in the current economy can no longer sustain that individual? That's a systemic issue. Do you think people are not working hard enough to get a big enough paycheck to get the means of subsistence? That's a systemic issue. If you have no work in your area and the only job available to you pays shit, you are going to be forced to work there for that shit wage, and you're still not even going to make enough to gain your subsistence. That's how capitalism works. It's free market, baby. It's you're free everything. It's free both in the appreciative form and free also in the negative, the inverse, the appropriative form, and where freedom is allowed in all sense everywhere, because we live in that absolute liberal ideology where it's like freedom, complete idealism, freedom, where it's like I'm free to do what I can quit my job and go somewhere else if I don't like my current job. I can go to another country if someone tells me get out of here, go back to my country. Even though I was born here. I'm so free to do whatever I want. Like that, like the arguments are full of holes. Those statements and theses are entirely just riddled with ignorance and not knowing of how the material condition works. Do you think someone could just uproot and be like, yeah, I don't like it here in America, I'm just gonna move? First, no one has the means of producing that moving. It's all been privatized. And so therefore, once it's been privatized, you have to pay someone to help you or allow you to use that material for that producing of the move, right? Whether it be out of state, or you're talking about a country, or you're talking about planes, or you're talking about different modes of moving. That's all been privatized. You know, it's like you can't just tell someone go up and do. They're not free to do that. As that antithetical. You're not free to do that because it's been privatized. There's a contradiction in capitalism. It's called freedom. Freedom itself is a contradiction to capitalism. There is no freedom in capitalism. Once everything's been privatized in this later stage of capitalism, thanks Lenin for calling it imperialism. That's what's happening now. Everything's been privatized. You can't go out any which way or anywhere because property has been privatized. But that is what negates itself from growth, and that is the second negation. The everything is already here, as we have said. We have the planes, we have the infrastructure, the machinery, the products, all the software, all of the learning, the tools, the knowledge, and the people who have the expertise. All of that is there, present. Capitalism has created its own grim reaper, the proletariat, which will then just not make the new wheel, not refurbish a new machinery, but they simply just change how we go about the mode of production with the existing tools, with the existing parliament in those parliamentary buildings took place in royal castles because that they had that, right? They had all of the machinery and stuff, and of course they built from it. So when the socialism does happen, or when the strike occurs, we will be seizing this existing infrastructure to make the socialism or to make the mode of production antithetical to capitalism with the existing structures, with the existing tools, machinery, materials, and all the things that capitalism has done, just like how feudalism is done. Feudalism has laid the farm to this grid, or it has allowed for this structure in their feudal times to produce, and then the bourgeois free market lovers just came in and just rearranged a few things. Then it becomes capitalism. Same ways work with socialism, same ways that feudalism did to slavery, same ways that slavery did to primitive modes of production. I mean, that's just how it works. So I'm not here reinventing the wheel or spitting anything new. I'm just observing the material condition and then spitting it back out to you guys. That's kind of how this works. That's pretty much how everything works. Is when people see stuff, they think stuff, they do stuff, stuff happens, all the time. How we analyze that then there does make a particular distinction. Now we are conducting a capitalism because of how people do stuff and what sort of stuff happens or what people have and the conditions of their having to make the stuff happen from their doing. It's a very nice, simple conversation. But that is how we get to our understanding of the material condition, just knowing how, what, do stuff. Talk about feudalism, talk about the negation. We're talking about striking or solidarity, or talking about anything, Mayday, anything. It's all related, interconnected. So let's talk about striking for a second now. I didn't have too much. I know what I wanted to talk about. The negation and the negation was a big topic. The negation was something applicable, emerging from the quantitative to qualitative change, that kind of stuff. But when you apply that to striking, so here is the negation of the general strike US. I've given this some thought. So the general strike itself, when it is established, it establishes limits. It must be considered a strike up to a certain point, of which then it will be negated into another form, the old or the new superseding the old. And this, of course, occurs when capitalism is dismantled and destroyed, of which then the strike will be negated because capitalism has been negated. There's like we talked about in the beginning. But then what after? Well, the after comes up from the becoming process of what we do now, to which then makes us in the future, right? So we are not knowing exactly what we will become later in the future. We will have to do the stuff to make the stuff happen in order for us to know exactly what we will become. Do you think the capitalists understood in their whims and ways of handling of private property that they will become imperialism? I didn't think so. They just did what they thought was right. They just did however they wanted to do as man free, right? No longer constricted by divine right and rule. Now it was property owned by, and then the person can do whatever they want with their property, objects in production, of which then the forces of production made society, formed it, and created this type of superstructure in society, this culture in society, this type of politics and the views on science and all of these little topics that aren't relating to direct forces of how the material condition changes. It's like your culture, celebrities, the Met Gala, all these types of sort of things. They all existed throughout history, just in very different forms. But of course, the superstructure itself helps molds and change the base structure, kind of like a back and forth. So society itself helps change the mode of production, and the mode of production forms and shapes the culture of society. And it happens cyclically. Life is just one big cycle. And we get really into dialectics and understanding and reading theory, your Engels and your old Marx, your Stalins, your Lenins, your Mao's, Rosa Luxemburg's a little bit, all of your philosophers who went into dialectics. Knowledge is a spiral. It loops back onto itself. Knowledge is not a straight linear line. You don't just gain, and then you just know more. Knowledge is spiral. Knowledge forms in a spiral. You start an idea, you wrap it back out onto it, and then complete the idea. And then you do it again for the next idea. You complete the idea. You start the idea, you develop it, you encase it, you understand it, you complete it. Next idea. You start it, you understand it, you wrap around to it, you formulate a conclusion, and you complete it. This knowledge is spiral, and that is how we know things. It is because we surround ourselves, or we are surrounding, particular phenomena, objects, existing to understand how stuff works. This spiraling of knowledge, completely natural. And this is also where we get that cyclical sense, where it's like we go back on to each other to create phenomena, understanding, knowledge, and knowing how stuff works, right? You don't just look at something in throw and be like, yeah, that's how that, I know exactly what that is. When you first see something for the first time in your life, that is that emerging point, that starting of that new idea. Then you spend time with it, you understand it, you tinker with it, you see how it works and functions in the material condition, you present yourself with it, and then whoosh, it becomes a complete idea. Now you are able to understand, articulate, conceptualize, articulate, and share what is at hand, right? For like this water bottle right here, right? So to you, in this specific shape, it is that beginning point to which maybe never you'll reach that, looping back. But for me, I have had many loops with this water bottle and how it functions, how it works and such. Same things with the objects in your life and the skills and the demands of the labor of which experience in your life, right? How all happen in this cyclicalness, in this cycle, and where you are introduced to something and where you develop yourself with it, present yourself with it, and understand it, to which then it becomes a complete idea. And there could be circles making this other big circle, at which the circle itself with a bunch of loops, this one circle contributing to another circle. So you'll have just many of these circles and cycles at which develop an understanding of how an object exists, these complete ideas to a particular object to know what it is. The theory of knowledge is a great thing. The theory of knowledge is, it's a deep topic. That's another topic for another day. But when we talk about cycle knowledge, dialectics, we're just talking about the motion of life, the laws of motion, what makes things move. And movement is how we derive meaning. Because when nothing moves, it is dead. It has no meaning. It cannot spur any meaning, right? Because something is dead, that means it has lived. So therefore, from that point, we can derive a meaning. But it is much more fruitful to have something live, living, and moving to denote and make that meaning. A cheetah running gives you a lot more of how it behaves and understands and its existence, rather than it's just sleeping, right? It's not moving. It's dead in a sense. It's not moving. It's dead in its movement. There's not much meaning. You can just see it sleeping. Movement is what creates that meaning. And movement happens all the time. Objects stagnant, right? When you see a piece of metal or you see a building, it looks stagnant. It looks like it's just there. But on its molecular level, like it could be atomic or whatever, there are forces that go against it, from it, to change it. Eventually, over time, as we all know, metal rusts, wood decays, plastic deteriorates many, many millions of years, right? But this is that decaying process that exists in everything. And this goes back to the negation of the negation. The negating process of any existing object goes upon and it emerges from itself. And where you leave a cheeseburger out in nowhere, unwrapped, just on a park bench, it eventually will become moldy. It has existed in a clean, edible state, in which what it was negated by a dirty, unedible, moldy state, right? So the negation of the negation exists in many of these capacities. Water boiling, right? From which the water was not boiling to when it is boiling. The boiling water negated its previous state. When you believe that cheeseburger out on the park bench, its clean, edible state was negated by its now future moldy, dirty state, inedible state. Well, I guess you could still eat it, but it wouldn't be a good time for you. Same thing with this water bottle. It was at one point full up to the top. I have negated that state by introducing me, this force, the drinker of the water bottle. Now it's about halfway-ish. But the negation and the negation can be applied to any of these sort of phenomena. So when you're talking about a strike is negated by the dismantling of the purpose of the strike. So you wouldn't strike anymore if there was no purpose to strike, right? That is how the negation works. And then solidarity as well. The negation of solidarity comes from the dismantling of that purpose of that solidarity, right? Which then everything becomes common. That's kind of like the development of property, individual to private to public to common. So it's that development of individual property. People own stuff, people make stuff and then have it. Private property, other people can make stuff and then other people can own it. And then public property, other people can make stuff, but then now that property is everyone's. It's not just one person's. And then common property, people make stuff. And that's it. People just make stuff. People can have it, whatnot, utilize it or not. Like common property, right? That stage of development and mode of production, and where nothing is produced in surplus. Nothing is produced. Things are produced as needed. And that is the goal of socialism, is things are produced not as like commodity production, because commodity production produces an excess. I like to think of commodity production as this blanketing of a market. So you cast this blanket over a market way too big for the market, and then you cover the whole thing, and then you have captured, in a sense, the profits from that production, even though you've produced way too much. So let's say your market consists only of 10 million buyers, but your company made 50 million of the product. You cast a blanket over the market, hoping to extract that profit, and then bail and then get out of the market. The market's dried up. It's no more. That's a past thing. That market, that's old. They get onto the new stuff, right? This cyclical appropriative process, which does not consider the use of the land, use of the products, use of the material condition. It's just wasteful, pretty much. That is the negation of the negation. What time is it? Ooh, 5 minutes left. I'm taking a little water. If you have any questions right now, type them out, come off mute. We could talk about it. I'm going to yap a little bit for 5 more minutes about negation of the negation and the unity of struggle and opposite. The bed. You're not supposed to be on the bed. Don't be on the bed, guy. That's my guy right there. We call him the piss me off guy. That's all he does. Just piss me off. Okay, water's drank. Cat's off the bed because he's a dirty outside cat now. Before he was an inside cat. Now he's discovering what it's like to be outside. He rolls around on the ground, pisses everywhere, pisses me off. Love that guy. But here we go. Dope discussion. That's right. That's all the discussion is. Negation and the negation. Some great stuff. Quantity and quality. Unity of opposites and struggles. Okay, so this, I would say, a much more basic law. We really should have started with this in the first to set the foundation of the discussion a couple weeks ago. But here it is, the law of unity of struggles and opposites. So Mao says dialectical materialism is, and it is true, the study of the unity of opposites. So it's how things oppose each other to make the one. I like to say, if you ever heard me say it, the two that makes the one. There's always two that makes one. There is never just one thing to an object's existence. There's always partitions at what makes that thing. So here is scissors. This one scissor is made up of two blades. The two blades of which made up by these two handles, because they're separate, of which the one blade, right, in the two blades to make the one scissor, itself partitioned. You can cut it where it was handle, no handle, right? It's partitioned itself. And even going down here, partition, you can see the different lines, which it was, I don't know if you can see that, but they're different you can always partition two into the one. You can always partition the one into the two to make it the object. And then you scale up, you have the one scissor with two blades. And the one blade is partitioned from handle to no handle. That is your partitioning. That is your unity of opposites and struggles basic framework, right? There is no exact inherent contradiction explained in that little explanation, but know that two makes the one. You can always derive a meaning and understanding of it. Let's try a lighter. So you have a lighter, right? Now, there are many different twos to ones, right? You can partition this in. We can partition it down the middle to this black part, to this handle part. That's a partition. The two that makes the one. And it exists everywhere. What time is it now? Oh my God, 3 minutes till. The unity of opposite and struggles denotes this phenomena as absolute to the material condition. Every single thing exists as two, represented as one. Man and human himself, not man, penis holder, man, the being that thinks, capital M, M-A-N. Or you could say human being or individual, right? The individual exists as two that makes the one. The mind, the body, of which the mind and the body, addressed, combined, inseparable, makes the soul. That lovely, juicy individual spirituality, the soul thing. Thank you for being here. Oh, okay, gotta get going. Love to see it. I didn't see that fast. But that is that two that makes the one. The one individual C comprises of the mind and the body, of which the dress makes the soul. The soul, not itself a being separate from it, but contingent on these two existences. The soul and the spirit of the human becomes and comes and emerges out of the mind and the body. So it is not the soul that is just like Casper the Ghost, where it's like they are now this entity that could just whoosh, fly everywhere and, do all this supernormal activity. The soul comes from materially, and in its most material phenomena, the emerging of what you think and what you are. And that's where a soul comes from. That's how every individual human is unique in being. And we must, of course, appreciate and respect the fact, because everyone is so different and unique, right? We are so unique at the same time. We are the same. We are the same because we are so unique. There exists no one or two particular pairs of individuals that are exactly the same. which then makes all of us the same. Expanding out to the material condition shared, battery. This is my little charger battery. Microphone, you can see it. Scissor. Everything exists so uniquely. Even two pairs of I don't have two of the same objects near me. I only have the ones. But imagine I had two pairs of scissors. Even in commodity production, of which done by machine, majority of the time, produces like objects, exists differently. Each two pairs of scissors you grab out of anywhere in the world are not going to be exactly the same, especially in its chemical or it's like, its organization at the molecular level, the exact plastics used, the time made, the exact blemishes on it. It's not going to be the same. But at the same time, everything is the same because of it. Because you have to go down to a much lower atomic level, and where things are made of quarks and gluons and stuff like that. That's where we're all the same. And then you go up. The rearrangement of those quarks and gluons makes different atoms. But atoms all the same when rearranged. Now you go up a little farther. Now you have cells and stuff like that. But cells all pretty much uniquely or unique, because not all the sames are made the same. All cells, right? So, but then you go up a little more. All cells are the same when you're talking about humans. And humans are very individual, very unique. But then you go up another level. All humans are the same when you're talking about society. But societies are all the same when you talk about different nations and stuff. Different nations are all the same when you talk about in X, Y, Z. And it's keep going. It's all cyclical. Builds upon one another. That is the love of dialectics. That is where you can emerge out of dialectics. Most of the discussions recently now has just been founded on the basis of dialectical materialism. It's been making these agendas much easier to make, because then I don't have to rely on a particular agenda to stick to. Dialectical materialism, because it has this unique quality of being able to combine everything, there just needs to be an investigation to make that connection. So that's it. My spidey senses tingle me. That is 5:01. I just checked the clock. So cool. That's it out of me. Next week we'll have to see. I'm doing a lot of traveling this week. I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm being a lot of everywhere. So we'll see what we talk about next. Maybe we'll actually go into that deep dive of unity of opposites and struggles to finish off the laws of dialectics. So we'll see. That's it out of me. I will hang out a few more minutes, answer any questions, topics, stuff like that. If anyone has anything, come off mute. We can chat. Other than that, that's it. I'm done. I'm done yapping. It's been that hour for me. So if you want to come off mute, do all stuff, feel free. I'm not here to silence anyone's voices. But if you need to go ahead. No one's holding you either. So thank you. We are recording. This will be up on YouTube Friday. And I damn sure will make sure it'll be up on Friday, because last week it was on Saturday. I thought I had scheduled it, but I didn't. But don't worry, this one will be up on Friday. It will. I'll do it right after this. So cool. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna stick around for a little bit, hang out, but we'll be doing a hard stop at 5:05 in 2 minutes. So cool. Hang out, do stuff, whatnot. Leave if you need to leave. And yeah. Thanks for being here. I love you all.